From the site of Noah's Ark to the depths of the Red Sea, the grandeur of Mount Sinai and the ash ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah, these and other new surprising discoveries are brought to life in this series by international explorer, archaeologist and author Jonathan Gray.
Good evening, friends. I'm Jonathan Gray. I've been involved in archaeological work for quite some time, and have we got some exciting things to share with you? We're going to start with Noah's Ark tonight. We pulled into the Kurdish town of Debayazit about dark and checked into the Erzurum Hotel here on the right, and then I went across the road to buy some food. There was a little supermarket sign immediately across the road, although I must say the supermarket itself was probably no bigger than a bathroom. And as I approached the side of the shop, I noticed 1, 2, 3 bullet holes right there in the shop window. So I decided we did not need to buy food that night. So we went back to the hotel. The street emptied very, very fast. And about midnight, my teammate in the room up near the top of the hotel, Trevor, called out, "Jonathan, Jonathan, wake up, wake up." And I listened. There was the sound of dogs barking. Something fell in the street, and the boom, 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 boom of Turkish artillery continued for hours. There was the occasional pop, which was probably the return fire from the outnumbered Kurds. And by morning, when we went out of the hotel, we discovered that 13 civilians had died within 100 metres of the hotel during the night. Now, the reason we were here, and by the way, we're right across here at the very extreme end of Turkey, over here in the Mount Ararat area. Debayazit is the base camp for Noah's Ark expeditions. This town was the base for our work at this time also. And the whole thing started way back in 1959. At that time, a Turkish airline pilot was taking stereo photographs, and these photographs were sent to Dr. Brandenburger of Ohio State University. He was a world expert on photogrammetry. And by the way, Dr. Brandenburger is the same man who had discovered the Cuban missiles facing America in the Kennedy era. When Brandenburg saw this photo, he said, "I have never seen anything like this before. Here is a massive ship in the mountains." He carefully studied the photograph, and the news soon got out. An American expedition party went there, and they spent a day and a half at the site. Somebody said, "Let's blast a hole in the side and see what comes out." Real good archaeological method. Well, they did so, and out came timber-shaped pieces of stone, according to one member of the party. Of course, wood could not petrify in just a few thousand years, could it? The verdict was nothing of archaeological interest. 17 long years went by, and then a man called Ronald Wyatt, he was an American biblical archaeologist, took an interest in the site. Nothing had happened all this time. It had been totally rejected. Then Ron began to do some scientific tests. Ron actually was a man who believed the Bible implicitly, but when he came to this site, he said, "This is too big for me. It's longer than a football field. It's as large as a medium-sized battleship." Ron went back home, and he said to some of his friends, "Look, we have to pray for a miracle. If this is Noah's Ark, and we're not sure whether it is, but if this is the big boat in the mountains that is long spoken of in ancient legend and in the scripture, let's pray for an earthquake so that we can excavate it. The earthquake may bring it out of the ground, or it may fall away, the earth may fall away." So they prayed for several months, these Christian friends who believed in prayer. And then on November the 25th, 1978, at 3 minutes to 11, an earthquake lifted this structure completely out of the ground to a distance of 20 feet or 6 meters. Now, the earth, they probably dropped away from it. This is what we believe. Nobody was killed. The villagers were no strangers to earthquakes, but this one they considered abnormal. It was preceded by the sky turning silver. The people who were in that village went out into the streets. They were all outside, nobody was killed, and the earthquake was described as not normal, a miracle. People in the nearby village looked upon this as a bad omen, and they got up and left, 20 of them. Well, friends, there it is, before and after. The picture on the right is before the earthquake. You see it in the ground, and here is afterwards. Following extensive testing at the site, Ron Wyatt began to suggest at last that this possibly was Noah's Ark. But the skeptics came out, oh no, this thing has to be a freak of nature. Get real, what else could it be at 6,300 feet or 2,000 metres altitude? And then there were those who said, well, look, there's not enough water to produce a worldwide flood, surely. And they kept poo-hooing it. Well, friends, let's see. We do have 90% of Earth's surface covered by water. And there's 18 times more water below sea level than there is land above it. It's a well-known fact that most of Earth's mountains are of recent formation. And if seabeds can rise, and if continents can sink, there'd be heaps of water for a worldwide flood. Now, the old traditions tell us that before the great disaster, a survival vessel was built, and that representatives of all land animals were taken on board. But you say, how could all those animals squeeze in? Well, this is a picture similar to what I found in a friend's little girl's storybook, where even the giraffe had to put his head out of even the elephant and the giraffe had to put his head out to relieve the pressure. Now, I don't think that Noah's Ark was anything like that. The truth is, the Ark of the Bible was enormous, longer than a football field, I should say 32,000 tons, and room enough inside for 494 double-decker buses. Now, there is a man called Ernst Mayr, probably the leading American taxonomist. He says that there are 1 million animal species, that 60,000 of these are sea animals, 70% of the remainder are insects, and that you have about 20,000 species of land animals. This includes birds, amphibians, reptiles, and of course mammals. Now, if we were to place all of these 2 by 2 into the Ark, you would only be occupying 41% of the space. So I suppose the question really is not how did Noah fit all these into the boat, but what did he do with all that extra space? Certainly there was enough room for all those animals on the boat. Now, concerning the great flood, this was no gentle rising of water. When the cosmic disaster struck, the earth was tipped on its axis, tremendous friction resulted under the earth, cracks opened up, and fire and water burst out. And in the explosion, volcanic ash and hot water was blown high into the sky. The protective vapor canopy around the planet began to collapse upon the earth. It poured down in such volume and force, the result was disastrous. Huge tidal waves swept from pole to pole. Land masses and seas were churned up together. Did you know, friends, that on every continent and in numerous places are vast fossil graveyards where creatures have been swept to death in their millions? Land creatures and creatures of the deep sea, mixed and buried together in a completely unnatural way. and fossils of countless animals have been found buried in a swimming position. We have complete islands and mountains, hundreds of feet high, from the Arctic Circle down to tropical Burma, completely composed of animal bones that have been washed together in some great disaster. And on tall, isolated hills, hundreds of thousands of hills worldwide, are bone-filled chasms. Human artefacts are mixed in with some of these. There was mass extinction, friends, in all parts of the world, simultaneously, and sudden burial. You go across to the northern parts of the northern hemisphere, across Siberia and Alaska, millions of remains of tropical mammoths, a large type of elephant, are found embedded in frozen water-laid muck. And these mammoths, by the way, some of them have been found in perfect condition. The flesh is still good enough to eat. Flesh that shows it was instantly buried, instantly frozen, snap frozen, before anything could decay. As a matter of fact, on the tongues of some of these animals have been found buttercups. They were feeding, and they were buried and frozen quickly before they could decay. And in their stomachs, pine cones have been found. You can wander along some of the beaches of northern Siberia, and it is like walking along in front of shop windows, where you will see sometimes mammoths emerging in the sides of the cliff, and bones lying all over the beach, where the erosion is now coming and bringing them out. Predators are found today, frozen in mid-motion all over the world, still swallowing their prey. As for example, this perch in the act of swallowing a herring. This was found in Wyoming, United States. And friends, millions of fossils, perfectly preserved, testify of sudden death and sudden burial worldwide. Water-laid death. We have all over the world things we're not told about. Tree trunks penetrating through several seams of coal, as in this one in France. Here is a most crucial fact. How did these trees stand on end for millions of years while waiting to be buried if these layers are millions of years old? No, friends, each of these layers was rapidly laid down by moving water. Water covered the earth. And as the water continued to remake the surface of the earth, eventually the time came, as the ocean basins were expanding in this great disaster, that the water ran off, leaving behind these high water marks which you see all around the world. Evidence that they have not been there over millions of years, because the erosion has not taken place. They're still there. They are no more than a few thousand years old. Evidence of a falling water level off the continents as the water eventually drained back into the seas. Now, the boat landed up in the mountains. The survivors gazed upon a totally different world. Barren wastes, bleak and sterile hills, and extreme hot and cold. New mountain ranges were still being thrust up. The Great Flood was left in the memory of its survivors. And as these people fanned out, this became the most universal memory of mankind. We have over 600 different legends worldwide of this great worldwide flood that destroyed a world, and a handful of survivors survived. For more than 2,000 years, there were reports among historians from Egypt down up to Greece to Mesopotamia that pilgrims used to visit the remains of the Ark. And some of them would take amulets and make lucky charms from parts of the Ark's remains. Then, around 800 BC, the Assyrians recorded a visit to the Ark in which they had to go down 3 stories into the ground. When I heard that Ron Wyatt had found Noah's Ark buried in the mud, I was very, very sceptical. For years, friends, I had followed the stories of men climbing up Big Mount Ararat, and my belief grew that the Ark lay partly hidden in ice in a canyon on that mountain. However, none of these stories had been authenticated. Alleged photographs had either been lost or were inconclusive. There was no hard evidence. I did not want to believe that this thing found by this man under mud on a hillside was Noah's Ark. I was very, very sceptical about the whole matter. And then I read an article in a Christian magazine which was ridiculing Ron, and that made me firmer than ever in my opposition against him. But however, I did decide that I would put my money where my mouth was. So I flew across to the United States, and I decided that I would confront this man with these questions. And I hurled up all my objections against him. But it was I who was mistaken. I must now confess publicly that I was wrong. The solid evidence was there, and my arguments one by one evaporated. So I joined the team. On the slopes of the Ararat Mountains, Ron found some big stone objects with holes through them. These were similar to ancient sea anchors found on the seabed near shipwrecks around the world. These, by the way, were essential equipment for ancient shipping. They were called more appropriately drogue stones. With their flat surface, they created a drag in turbulent water to prevent a ship from slipping sideways against the wave and being capsized. Of course, in calmer waters, they'd just hang right down in the deep, sounding for the bottom. And they could have been manipulated also to direct a vessel around an obstruction. Now, these drogue stones in the Turkish mountains were much bigger. They were of the size that you would expect to belong to a boat as large as the Ark. There was a hole through each one of them, and you'll notice that the holes have an inner diameter which is larger than the outer. The knot in the centre would swell and hold tight, thus preventing the rope from moving and chafing. Of course, the skeptics tried to explain these as Armenian tombstones. Friends, here we have a shipwreck with more of these stones. We have a Turkish diver here on the bed of the Mediterranean Sea. You try telling this Turkish diver that what he's found are just Armenian tombstones, and that those holes there in the stones were simply for candles. Well, my objections kept flowing through to Ron, and I said, but this boat shape in the mountains, it's not a boat. Ron, the streamlined shape is caused by lava flowing around an obstruction. Well, there's the shape. You notice that this is pointing uphill. The answer came, what you need, Jonathan, is an understanding of fluid dynamics. Now, here are 2 pictures. One of the boat shape up in the Turkish mountains, and one of a totally different shape. If this shape on the left was formed naturally, the mud flow would hit the obstruction and pile up behind it, like a light bulb shape, and then it would move outward and possibly meet lower down. And the lower down portion would be where the sharp end was, something like this. So it would come out here, would flow down and form its point downwards. But you notice the point is upwards here. This is not the way it happens in nature. This is the way nature does it. This is man-made, this is nature-made. So Jonathan, learn about fluid dynamics, Ron said, and you'll realise that this could only be a man-made object. Well, my objection was shot down. The scientists continued to come, and they brought 3 different types of metal detector over several years. They found a pattern of iron at regular intervals each time. The pattern found by the metal detectors was recorded by laying yellow and pink tape along the lines of pattern. You'll notice that the object is impaled here on a big rock. you'll notice that the straight lines are bent, much the same as a car accident wrapped around a lamp pole. These two objects, the boat shape and this rock, do not belong together. These collided at some time and hence the damage on the side. This is a foreign body. This must have come from somewhere else. We'll show you what we believe happened a little later in the program. Now, since the boat shape came up from the mud, the weather has been eroding the mud, and vertical uprights resembling a ship's ribs have been appearing more prominently along the sides. And after a section of the mud was shaved off, vertical petrified ribs began to show as a different colour, and deeper still horizontal lines showed up, and these indicate a lattice pattern. Subsequent radar scans of the full length of the structure were made, lengthwise, crosswise and laterally along the sides. The ground penetrating radar picked up a definite pattern, and as we looked, the radar showed with refined detail the same pattern picked up by the metal detectors. And what the radar showed was stunning. It revealed walls, cavities, a door near the front in the south end, ramps, and near the door, two large round tank structures, 14 feet high and 24 feet across with metal bands around them. Friends, we now have 1,000 feet, that's 300 metres of paper printout from the radar scans. When the information was fed into a computer, it gave this shape under the ground. The vessel is in a state of petrification and collapse. I say that with regret. It appears that what we have here is the remains of the hull and the bottom deck. The two top decks have collapsed, and what we appear to have is their rubble lying on top of the bottom deck. There seems to be a pattern to this rubble. As you walk along the structure between the two walls, you'll notice it rises in a step here and along here, it comes down in a step here and another step here and goes straight again. The computer visualises from this the original shape of the structure. Quite modern looking, is it not? Bob Morrell, a member of our team, has constructed a model based upon the radar scans. There are 72 ribs along one side and 72 ribs along the other side, facing each other exactly, based upon the radar scans. 72 and 72, 144, a good biblical number. And there is the doorway, which is about 8 feet across. The door has gone, but the cavity is there, about 2.5 metres wide. Friends, also we have a few more pictures here of Bob Morrell's model drawn up from the radar scans. There are 4 protrusions which appear to be at the back here. People have suggested to us they might be stabilisers. The boat did not have to travel anywhere. All it had to do was ride out a number of months of the most turbulent storms this world has ever seen, when seas and continents were churned up together. Now you'll notice here in the model that the doorway is in the front here. This is where the radar shows it to be. That's the doorway. So it's a ship. Well, you might ask, could it be a Roman galleon, perhaps a Viking ship? It's a question that I'm asked from time to time. Well, let's see. You'll notice that our boat is in a continental heartland location, several hundred kilometres from the nearest Mediterranean Sea. For it to get there, this land would all have to be underwater. Now, in historical times, this has always been land. It has not been underwater. So I suggest to you, friends, that instead of somebody inventing a boat that we're never told about in history, let's admit that the ancient world did record a ship in this area, and that ship is the legendary Noah's Ark, at a time when the waters did cover the land. Now compare the size. Here is the size of Noah's Ark as given in the Bible. 300 cubits, we're told. Now, if Moses, the compiler of this account, was raised and educated in Egypt, he would undoubtedly be using the Egyptian cubit to describe it. The Royal Egyptian cubit was 20.6 inches, just over half a metre. Now, we know that later cubits were used, and sometimes people say, well, is the cubit the distance from the elbow to the hand? Or is it perhaps the 18-inch Hebrew cubit? Well, we know, friends, that the Royal Egyptian cubit was the one used by the Hebrews at least until the time of King Solomon. Our team was in Jerusalem recently, and we measured some tombs from the time of Solomon. They were cut according to the 20.6-inch cubit. The 18-inch cubit did not come into use until much later. Well, while we're here in Jerusalem, let's just have a look at some of the scenery here. Here's a dear little Arab boy that was selling bagels on his lovely sweaty arm one afternoon, selling them off one by one to people who wanted to take them home to eat. Dear little fellow. So 300 cubits equals 515 feet, or 158.46 metres. The critics have said that boat shape in Turkey is roughly the size of Noah's Ark. This is actually a sketch based upon radar scanning. You'll notice there's the rock intrusion here. You'll notice a passageway. There's 9 divisions, plus the pattern of metal as well. Now, they say it's roughly the length of Noah's Ark. Roughly? That won't fly, friends. It's exactly 300 cubits in length. Careful measurements were made by 2 different groups to show its inside length to be. One group went 1 year and they measured it at 515.7 feet. Another team went the next year and measured it at exactly 515 feet to the last inch. 6,180 inches. I tell you, friends, that's not rough, that's very precise. The length of Noah's Ark and the length of that structure are identical. And the average beam width is right too. And I'd say, friends, if I was still a skeptic, for one to quibble away such a coincidence as a boat shape upon the mountains of Ararat, 300 cubits in width, and with an average 50 cubit width, and ascribe it to a chance, would be to drive scepticism beyond the limits. Now, another test is the place names in the area. Now, this is an interesting one. Archaeologists know that ancient place names are among the most imperishable of human things. Lost cities have been located by heating ancient place names when they are unchanged for thousands of years. Place names often record events that happened in the locality. This is a very scientific approach. Let's use it here. We're told that toward the end of the flood in the scriptures, Noah sent out a dove and a raven or a crow to test for the re-emergence of land. At first, with nowhere to stand, the crow kept returning. Finally, it did not return. Here is an aerial photograph of the area. Here's our boat. Each of these dots represents a place name connected with Noah's Ark and the people who came out of it. 2 kilometres away from the boat shape, eastward, there is a village. This village has a name, Karg Akenwaz, which means the crow will not stand or return. Now notice this map. Here's Big Mount Ararat. Here is our boat. Here we have the mountains of Ararat. We are here about 19 kilometres south of the big mountain. Notice the place names. Here is a place called the Valley of Eight. Here is a village called the Place of Eight. And the village people say they don't know where the name came from. It's been there for thousands of years. Now, how many people, according to the scripture, were on Noah's Ark? There were 8 people. Now notice this one, Deronink. And the name translated into English means where the oars were reversed. Now, friends, I don't believe that Noah's Ark had oars, But this is a simplistic way of saying where the boat slowed down. You actually have a boat that uses oars, and you reverse the oars, you're slowing down the boat. So what we're having here is a story told us by the place name that something happened here where a boat slowed down. Now here is the spot. It's 6,000 feet above sea level. And here the name says this is where the boat slowed down. Are we talking about a boat going over the mountains here when water covered these mountains and the boat slowed down? Did you know that the ancient civilizations tell us where to find Noah's Ark? Here are the clues. Notice. On the left-hand side we have the clues. On the right-hand side we have what we have found. Number one, the Bible tells us that the ark landed in the Ararat region. Number two, it landed on the mountains. Mountains, plural. 3. Ancient traditions tell us that it landed on that it's now to be found on a hill, not a tall mountain. 4. In the Quran, we are told that the name of that hill is Al-Judi. Now, the Quran, of course, was written by Muhammad, who was a descendant of Abraham. And although the Muslims are not Christians, they still believe in the flood. They have ancestors who survived it, just as we do. Now, we have found that our boat shape is in the Ararat region. Secondly, it's on a mountain range, which would be compatible with on the mountains of Ararat. It is on a hill, not a tall mountain. And the name of this hill on maps for many years has been Al-Judi. The Turkish maps have it as Al-Kudi, very, very similar. It was stated to be on the hill's west side. Indeed, our object is on the hill's west side. The old traditions held that the ark was alongside a large rock. Interestingly, this present object is alongside a large rock and impaled on it as well. If this were the ark of which the Muslims spoke, then it had since been pushed sideways onto the rock by the alluvial mud flow that slid down to the east of it, resulting in the arks being almost completely covered. Point 7. The Assyrian king Ashurnazirpal II, and this king reigned between 883 to 859 BC, claimed that the ark's resting place was Nisr. Friends, less than 500 metres from this present object was a village now called Uzunjili, and under it, according to older maps, lay Sar, or Nasar, or Nisr. Point 8. The ark was reported to be on a north-south axis. Our boat, likewise, is orientated just 10 degrees from north-south. Now, another point is you go down into it according to the old Assyrians. Friends, it was buried in the ground until November 1978. Then, of course, there's the size, the precise length, and the precise width. Do some of the remains of Noah's Ark lie under the mud? Well, we have scraped away some of the mud already, but the final word will come when the excavation takes place. Now, friends, the question will arise, is there any artefactual evidence? Let's have a look at this.
The governor of Ari had Ron demonstrate the radar. When he found what looked like a broken timber near the surface, the governor had it dug up and gave it to Ron to be verified. The lab test revealed organic carbon. It was petrified wood. But the final proof was when it was sectioned. The evidence was obvious. Not only could the internal wood structure be seen, it was also clearly laminated wood. 3 separate layers could be seen. The adhesive material, or glue, had seeped out and hardened on one end and was perfectly aligned with the internal layers. But the ultimate test as to whether this was indeed once wood was to determine the presence of organic carbon. Galbraith Labs took samples of the timber. They first analyzed for total carbon content, both organic and inorganic combined. The next test was for only inorganic carbon. By comparing the two results, we would know if organic carbon were present. We're in the process of weighing the sample now before the analysis for the total carbon of this sample. The inorganic carbon will be included in this determination, all the carbon that's present. As we run the inorganic carbon, we'll be able to tell the difference if there's any organic present in the material. We're getting 0.71% total carbon in this.
0.71.
Present time we weigh about 500 milligrams of sample for a carbonate determination. That would be the inorganic carbon in the sample.
Right.
81 ppms inorganic carbon.
Okay, thank you very much.
Inorganic carbon equaled 81 ppms, or parts per million. This equals 0.0081%. The result, 0.71% total carbon less 0.0081% inorganic carbon leaves 0.7019 organic carbon. This indeed shows that this specimen did once consist of living matter. Another exciting evidence came in June of 1991. In the presence of 26 witnesses, Ron found a fossilized rivet.
Our last trip out there this past June, we found this very impressive rivet. And if you'll notice here, the plate itself is just a little more than 1/4 inch in thickness. It's approximately 3.5 inches in diameter, the plate itself, and then the shaft of the rivet is roughly 1 inch to 1.25 inches in diameter. And if you'll notice here, it was struck while it was hot and flared out the end of the shaft so that it would not slide back through the hole in this washer. And this shows that their abilities to use metal was quite advanced, quite sophisticated, and that, folks, there are thousands of these rivets on this boat. In fact, at every joint where the wooden structures are held together, they're held together by large metal plates which are predominantly iron, and then these rivets. Aluminum, iron, titanium, and other metals present sufficient evidence of a most sophisticated alloy. There are other specimens which also are consistent with what we would expect to find on Noah's Ark. One is a petrified section of a broken antler. Greg Brewer of Dixon, Tennessee, found this embedded in the Ark in August of 1989. Since it consists of the base of the antler, it can be positively identified by visual inspection. As antlered animals shed these antlers once a year, this shows that at some point in time, an animal with antlers lost them on the Ark. There is also a large quantity of coprolites in the areas where the Ark has deteriorated and broken away. These are, simply put, petrified animal droppings. Many of the evidences alone are convincing, such as the length. The petrified deck timber of laminated wood is the only specimen found to date of its type anywhere on this planet. Never has hand-hewn petrified wood been found, much less laminated. And the list goes on even beyond what we've examined here. But all of the evidences combined are overwhelming. We're delighted with the results, and at this point in time, personally, I can look anybody in the eye and say that this boat-shaped formation in eastern Turkey is actually the remains of Noah's Ark.
Friends, the Turkish government reportedly sent a archaeological team to the site, and they recovered 4 intact metal rods, about 4 feet long, say about 120 centimetres long. These are now in the custody of the Ministry of Mines and Minerals. So you see, even before we get inside the boat, much is already being pushed out. As the mud comes over the top, it pushes down into some of the broken timber, into the rooms, and pushes out again items from the side where the rock has intruded. So we're getting a little foretaste of what may be found when excavation takes place later. Now there's a question that inevitably arises, and that is, but there couldn't be iron in a boat that old, surely? Well, friends, I suggest you get hold of a copy of my book, Dead Men's Secrets. Over 12 years of research in 30 countries produced some startling evidence. The truth is that long before the so-called Iron Age, human technology was incredibly advanced. Not only iron, but even aluminium was in use. We have solid evidence of this. The history of the past now needs to be rewritten. From the ocean floor, from under the desert sands, and from vine-choked buildings in the jungles, 1,000 forgotten secrets are coming to light. The Turks have built a visitors centre for the expected tourist boom, which they hope for when the war is over. This war is a real problem, friends. Over 10,000 people have died, and it's not in sight to have an end yet. However, when a protective dome can be erected over the boat to keep out the weather, then excavations should commence. Meanwhile, there's a man sleeping in this building. He's an elder from the village a few metres above. His name is Hassan, a very kindly gentleman. He sleeps with an Alsatian dog, and he calls himself the guardian of Noah's Ark. So he and his dog look after that boat shape there. And as you can see, all we have is the hull of the ship plus the bottom deck with the rubble of the 2 top decks lying collapsed over the top of it. Now we now go up behind the boat, up this way, to the top of the range, about 2 kilometres back and about 300 metres higher. Notice here are the remains of a very ancient monument, believed to be at least 4,000 years old. Notice what it portrays. Here is a hammock-shaped mountain. Then there's a little hill next to it, and then there's a volcano. You'll notice a boat here with 8 people in it. An older man and woman, 3 other men, 3 other women. And above it there fly 2 birds. I wonder if they are the 2 birds mentioned in the biblical story. Here we have a comparison. Let's compare this with the landscape we see today. Notice the hammock-shaped mountain range here, and there it is again. There is the little hill, and there it is. Now the volcano is not in the picture, but it is over here to the right out of the picture. And what this ancient inscription is telling us is that the boat was up there one time. Today we have it here. But coming from that volcano, there is an ancient volcano lava flow. Now, volcano lava does turn ultimately into mud, and the mud flow carried this object, we believe, down the hill. And eventually it was impaled on this rock. And as it was damaged in the side and held there, the mud kept flowing down until eventually it covered over the boat. And this would explain, friends, why the Assyrians, 800 years before Christ, said that when they visited the boat, they actually had to go down into the ground. They explored 3 stories and some passageways. You will notice here that the rock is protruding into the side of it. it's been damaged there in the side. You see how it has penetrated the wreck? Well, there it is, pierced in the side and rejected even by many who sought for it. Now, only in Noah's Ark could the pre-flood world find any hope of survival. Most of them rejected it. And later, when Jesus told this planet that he had come to rescue mankind, that he was the only means to eternal life, he too was rejected by most of mankind, pierced in the side and rejected by those who sought life. Jesus has given us a prophecy. He says that as it was in the days of Noah, so it shall be in the days when he is to return. Now, if we are to go into the evidence which could be brought out, the Bible says that man had begun to multiply on the earth. Now, if we go back to our own history, we find that population was simply adding. It added to itself over many hundreds of years. But since about 1850, it's been multiplying. We have an exponential curve of population growth here. And I would suggest to you that the same thing was occurring in Noah's day. It says that men began to multiply upon the earth just before the flood. First there was the normal growth pattern, and then there was a sudden multiplication of population. You notice we have reached the same stage population pattern as Noah's day. There was also a very high civilization, tremendous technology. And when you consider that a boat contained a very sophisticated alloy of iron, aluminium and titanium, it's no surprise that we should be comparing Noah's day to our own day with high technology. Now, the Bible talks about Tubal-Cain, for example, as being a man who not only used metals and smelted them, but he instructed. So there was a school of metallurgy about 300 years before the flood. Now, if we were to equate that with our Industrial Revolution about 300 years ago, where could the people before the flood have reached technologically by the time the flood arrived? We certainly have come a long way in our history. Now, a third comparison is corruption. The Bible says that at the time of Noah, corruption was widespread. And today, friends, is there anyone who would doubt that we have reached a similar stage in human society? The violence filled the earth. And today we do not need anyone to tell us how widespread violence is again. Now, there's a prophecy in the books of the Bible, it's in the second book of Peter, which says that there will come a time when people will say, where is the promise of Jesus coming? All things have continued on since the beginning. And Peter reminds us that the people of our day are going to be ignorant, willfully ignorant of past events. They're going to be ignorant of the fact that there was a great flood. And they deliberately will forget this fact, Peter says, that God did destroy the world with a mighty flood long after he had made the heavens by the word of his command. And God has commanded that the earth and the heavens be stored away for a great bonfire at the judgment day when all ungodly men shall perish. Now, doesn't that sound familiar? It's talking about that modern theory that's so rampant today that there has been no interruption to human history by the Creator. The modern skeptic unwittingly fulfills this prophecy. Ignoring evidence, he shouts down the great flood and Noah's Ark. And I say to my skeptic friends, you should keep quiet. Then the prophecy would fail. But you're making it come true. Our world will be caught by surprise sometime in the near future. I believe the Creator has set a time to intervene, and we are approaching it at breakneck speed. The Bible says that Noah's Ark contains a message for those who will live just before the second coming. The flood was an extraordinary intervention of God in history. Is it not appropriate then, friends, that the ark should be found just as Jesus is soon to return, the greatest intervention of all? I leave that thought with you. Friends, we now have some surprising discoveries from lost cities of the dead. A wise man once said, "The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be. And that which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun." On February the 13th, 1961, Mike Micasel, Wallace Lane and Virginia Maxey were fossicking 4,300 feet up in California's Coso Mountains when they stumbled upon a fossil-encrusted rock. Expecting it to be a hollow geode stone. Now, if you don't know what a geode stone is, it's a round stone, a little bit like a tennis ball. It's hollow inside and has crystals going in toward the centre. They thought it might be one of these. And so what they did was they got a diamond saw, and do you know the next day they broke that saw on this object? The surprise turned wild when instead of crystals they found inside the rock a mechanised device resembling a spark plug. Now, subsequently this rock was dated at 500,000 years of age. Even if one rejected such an age, this sophisticated artefact did present a problem. It was still far too old to be explained by our conventional theories. And what shall we do about the steel cube? Obviously part of a machine, and certainly machine fabricated, which was discovered hundreds of feet below ground in a coal seam, supposedly 340 million years old. It was later exhibited in a Salzburg museum. Friends, this is only a drawing because the object has now disappeared, although there are some who claim that it has now been found again. It was written up in a journal in Britain and also a scientific journal in France. Certainly it's a very interesting object, and many more of these have been found down inside coal mines. On Easter Day 1901, divers working in a very old shipwreck on the seabed off Antikythera Island near Greece brought up, among other relics, a metal artefact fused by the sea into a lump. The object collected dust for 50 years until it was restored by acid baths. You know, it proved to be a bronze machine with complex dials, movable pointers, inscribed plates, and a sophisticated system of interlocking gears. Actually more than 20 gear wheels, a differential gear, a crown wheel. It could work out and exhibit the motions of the sun, moon and planets. It could calculate their positions and the movement of the tides and the time of day. Friends, here is first-class precision mechanics, as accurate as any that can be made today. This computer was used for navigation purposes. It was a mechanism for checking one's position at night. With this, ships could sail anywhere in the world without being inside of land. It's believed to be from about 55 BC, but it's doubtless of a much older technology. As a matter of fact, the scientist Decella Price, he made a statement that this was like finding a jet plane in the tomb of Tutankhamun. A German scientist was wandering through the museum in Baghdad and he came across an object that was labelled as a cult object. And this is quite a common procedure with museums, that if something is not quite understood, it's often thought to be a cult or a religious object of some sort. But this German scientist believed it was more than this. So what he did was to take it away and test it out as a battery. Friends, we've got here something which is quite sophisticated, in tested working order, 6 inches high, and utilising iron, copper, electrolyte with asphalt as an insulator. Now, those at Sasafon were broken down into the component parts as though they'd been mass produced, and their manufacturer had been interrupted before assembling the pieces into working batteries. Altogether 15 of these have been found, and they are estimated to be about 2,000 years old. Now, a skeptic at one of my programs in New Zealand recently suggested that this metal rivet from the Ark site could hardly have been produced back so early because the people would need electricity to produce it. Well, friends, here we have electricity 2,000 years ago, and there is good evidence of electricity long before that as well. Now, electricity, of course, is needed to produce something of this calibre with its very refined alloy system of iron and aluminum and titanium. But I do believe that before the flood, they had an industrial revolution. The book of Genesis talks about a man called Tubal-Cain, who was an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. So he taught metallurgy. There was a technology before the flood, and this man lived about 300 years before the flood. Now, friends, discoveries such as these do pose awkward questions. Around the world, sitting in museums and in basements, there are some very sophisticated metal objects which would require a very high technology to produce, a technology not to be repeated until our day. Let's look at some of the houses of the ancient world. Recent discoveries have astonished archaeologists. Evidence of private houses fully equipped with upstairs ensuite bathrooms, tiled floors, hot and cold running water, flush toilets, patterned wallpaper made of, I'm going to say this and I'm going to shock somebody, aluminium, gold or silver sheets as thin as our wallpaper today, glass window panes, fine carpets and luxurious furniture, and modern gadgets that one dares not mention lest he be branded a liar. Now, Alexander Graham Bell, when he invented the telephone, said the old things have been reinvented. I wonder, why did he say that? Frederick Soddy, British nuclear scientist and a Nobel Prize winner, wondered whether the ancients might have achieved secrets and accomplishments that went beyond those that we have attained. Why did he say that? Did he have access to some ancient musty documents of the past? I was talking about wallpaper. Now, friends, wallpaper of sheet gold, silver and aluminium, every square inch of it decorated with intricate designs and figures and scenes, has been found in rolls on cities within the Amazon jungle. Here is an Amazon man. Now, you notice he's got someone else with him too. These are the head-shrinking people of the Amazon jungle, the Hevero tribe. I had an expedition down there. In fact, my very first expedition down into the Amazon was to meet these people a few years ago. And near them there are other people in eastern Ecuador who are bringing in from the ruins of ancient cities these rolls of wallpaper. Now, these are of aluminium or gold or silver. And today these are being torn by native artifact hunters from the walls of ancient buildings, long abandoned, vine-choked buildings in the inaccessible eastern jungles of Ecuador. Now, if only one could glimpse these before they are finally destroyed. But I tell you, friends, here we have a technology. These are riveted together. They're huge sheets, up to 24 feet long and 8 feet high. Friends, archaeologists are puzzling over drawings in Egyptian buildings such as these. A wall carving here depicts a scene where attendants seem to be carrying giant light bulbs with interior filaments in the shape of snakes connected to a box or switch with braided cables, and which strongly suggest powerful electric lamps supported by high-tension insulators. The cables are an exact copy of engineering illustrations as currently used. The cable is shown as very heavy and striated, indicating a bundle of many multi-purpose conductors rather than a single high-voltage cable. When you go to Egypt, you go to some of the undisturbed tunnels and tombs. You'll notice that there is no smoke on the ceilings. Now, compare this to medieval Europe, where you have buildings that have smoke on the ceilings and on the upper parts of the walls. Because in medieval Europe, of course, they used light sources which generated smoke, candles, oil lamps and so on. But today in the 20th century, as in ancient Egypt, there is no smoke on our ceilings. Could it be that there was a light source that we have forgotten the ancients possessed? There are many stories about such a light source around the world, from the Amazon to Japan and in between. Now, here we have an object in Mexico which has been enlarged so much, but the original size, the life size, is no larger than a pin. A pinhead. And here you have the detail. How possibly could that have been engraved on a pinhead? Could it be that these people knew the art of lenses? Well, here we have a lens, a crystal lens found in an Egyptian tomb. And lenses, which implies telescopes and microscopes, have been found in quite a few ancient cities around the world. There is evidence of a sudden appearance of instant civilizations. The commonly held view is that we came up from savage Stone Age beginnings. It was a slow but steady development to civilization. However, friends, actual discoveries show this is not so. All cultures began suddenly and fully developed. A long preliminary period is not supported by archaeology. The evidence shows no transition whatsoever between the ancient civilizations and any primitive forebears. They did not rise to their peak, they were at their peak from the beginning. So take, for example, Egypt. We all know this is a symbol of Egypt, the Sphinx here at Giza. Egypt sprang into existence suddenly, fully developed, that is, without transition from a primitive state, with a fantastic ready-made civilization. Great cities, enormous temples, pyramids of overwhelming size. Now here is a building 48 stories high, the Great Pyramid at Giza. You notice the people here on the camels. Pyramids, as I said, of overwhelming size. Colossal statues with tremendous expressive power. Luxurious tunnels and tombs, splendid streets, perfect drainage systems. And even a ready-made writing already perfected. A well-established naming system in which every pharaoh had as many as 5 names. Society was already divided at the beginning into specialist classes and a court which exhibited all the indications of well-defined precedence and form. I tell you, friends, in the remotest period of which there are records, Egypt and its sister civilizations show a level of civilization that is inexplicable. We have here Babylon. Babylon rose in the site where Sumeria had first of all risen. Sumeria appeared around the same time as Egypt, a civilization sudden, unexpected, and out of nowhere. And in the same fertile crescent we go to Baalbek. See the size of the man. Now, Baalbek conceals a mystery that may never be solved. 2 magnificent Roman temples were built upon this great existing platform. An immense prehistoric dressed platform. And those 2 temples which were built on top of this, which were the greatest in the Roman world, were dwarfed by this platform. The platform is a feat of engineering that has never been equalled in history. And here we have individual stones. Look at the size of this one here. 1 stone, 2 stories above the ground, lifted into place. This would weigh anywhere from 1,200 to 1,500 tons. Now, you notice they're raised into the building so high, and there are tunnels in the walling large enough for a train to go through. Now, even with the tools of modern technology, friends, we could not do something like this today. We could not move these building blocks intact. Our largest railway cars could hardly budge, let alone lift and carry these. It would take 3 of our largest overhead cranes, hoisting 400 tonnes each, to lift these, and I don't think it could be done without the stress breaking these objects. Supposing a block could be manoeuvred onto a wheeled vehicle, the enormous load would drive the wheels into the ground and grind them to pieces on the rock surface. We have here a mystery. Now, a third coincidence, we have the rising of Egypt suddenly. We have the rising of Samaria suddenly. And a third coincidence was the sudden rise of the Indus Valley civilization about the same time. Now, here we have an aerial view of one of these cities in the Indus Valley, which is now located in Pakistani territory. These also appear to have suddenly sprung up with no clear-cut traces of having evolved from primitive beginnings. What is one to make of this? Well, yes, I know the 19th century evolution theory was developed and was foisted on us and in our education system, that man came up from the mud and he gradually rose higher and higher until he became clever as we are today. But could this be a myth? If the evidence is showing us so many surprises from the past, could it be, friends, that we have been mistaken in this theory? Could man have come down, not up, originally? The known facts are these. We have fully developed civilizations, several of them, sharing many features in common, suddenly springing out of nowhere. We have language and script and agriculture and anthropological and archaeological finds that point to a common origin in the Middle East highlands. And the discovered writings of these ancient people all speak of a vanished golden age. And not only that, nearly all traditions of the ancient races worldwide tell us that the biblical history is true, that man was very, very smart in the beginning. Now, Professor Albright of Johns Hopkins University said, this excessive skepticism shown toward the Bible by important historical schools has been progressively discredited. He says that discovery after discovery testifies to the accuracy of the Bible. I think, friends, that the Bible has been unjustly criticised in the past by people who did not know the facts of ancient technology, which confirms that the biblical viewpoint of history is, after all, well on track. Not only do we have these civilizations springing up suddenly, but we also have a common origin. Scripts of various cultures reveal a common origin. From Egypt to China to Easter Island to North America and the Indus Valley, there is a distinct link between them. Now, the pre-flood world was a world of high civilization, but man was morally corrupt and violent. After the global flood, the sole survival vessel landed up here in the mountains near Ararat. And if we pinpoint the subsequent instant civilizations that arose across the world in a short space of time, we find that Ararat, the dispersion point, lies precisely in the middle. Now, there can be only one conclusion regarding this, friends, that from Ararat the descendants spread out around the world, and they took with them an advanced knowledge that had been preserved through the Ark, knowledge that enabled new civilizations to spring up suddenly. The oldest civilizations we have on Earth appear just long enough after a disaster such as the flood for a population increase to produce another culture. When the nations of the earth spread out, they found that most of the earth was still very covered with water. For example, what is now today the Sahara Desert was once a great inland sea. If you go to Egypt today, you'll see a name very prominently. It's the name Misra. Misra travel agent, Misra Road, Misra Hotel. Misra is a shortened form of Mizraim. Now, Mizraim was a grandson of Noah. Mizraim came down to Egypt and he found that Egypt was still largely covered in water. There was no course to the Nile. It was spreading out everywhere. Large amounts of water were rushing off the continent still. And Mizraim embanked the Nile and made much of the land around the Nile habitable. In fact, the name Mizraim means the embanker. And Mizraim made Egypt here a land that could be settled in. There is evidence worldwide of great inland seas after the flood. We have puddles up here in Australia. Australia had a great inland sea. Asia was largely covered by water. As we saw, in Africa it was the same. In North America, there was a large inland sea left behind by the flood. Over here in South America, we do not have an Amazon jungle millions of years old, as sometimes is speculated. As recently as 3,000 years ago, this was just one great inland sea. And there's even an old map that shows this. Now, friends, the Chinese, when they came to China, they said that they had to drain the country and get rid of dragons that were there. And as we know, Mizraim likewise drained Egypt. In fact, this is the story of the ancient races. And these people did more than this. They actually went out mapping the land. There are many old maps. In fact, we have about 14 of them. Most of these are on a spherical projection. You notice here the similarity between this ancient map, which is basically thousands of years old. It's recognised as a medieval map, but the copyists said that they used sources which were much, much older. And if you compare this with a satellite sketch map of the Earth, you'll notice there's a very strong similarity. We're talking here about a round Earth known by the ancients. Here is an ancient map of Antarctica alongside a modern map of Antarctica. And where today we have glaciers, the old maps show there were rivers. These people knew and mapped the whole world back there. Now here we have from Egypt a world map. If we were to draw a line horizontally and vertically through the Great Pyramid at Egypt, and you were to measure the amount of land space in each of these 4 squares, it's equal. Now, by accident or design, the Great Pyramid marks the precise centre of the land mass of the world, north, south, east and west. And each quarter has exactly the same number of square miles of land. This does suggest to us that a world survey was once made. They went to places like Easter Island. They knew about the Americas. For example, Christopher Columbus only discovered what had been found long, long before and forgotten by many. Now, here in South America, we have some very interesting country. It's my favourite continent. You notice that here we have a great cliff going down, a big drop about probably 3,000 feet, maybe 1,000 metres down. And here on the side of a huge hill, up in the Andes Mountains, we have a pathway that's been put right round the mountainside toward the ruins of an ancient city. Here is a drawbridge, and when the enemy came along, the drawbridge could be taken off and the enemy could not get through. But however did they do this? I mean, it's impossible to stand here, let alone build constructions. These people did not know the impossible, these jewelers in stone. And I remember my first trip down the Amazon. I took a little bus for 2 days, and I had a man sitting beside me actually chewing betel nut. The chickens and the little pigs and dogs were running all over the bus and fighting, and this man sat beside me for 2 days. And occasionally he would drowse off, then suddenly he'd clear his throat and he would expectorate onto the seat in front of me, which was overhanging my legs. But as the bus went around the mountainsides, it was very, very steep. And sometime we would find that there was a big chasm away down on one side, and just like this narrow pathway here, there was just enough room for the bus to come round. And I remember one occasion when the bus was negotiating this area, and there was on the side of the road a slip that had come down the cliff. And so the bus wheels went right sideways around this, and I could look away down the drop. I'll tell you, it's an unforgettable experience. Machu Picchu is well known on travel brochures. And friends, I just want you to notice this. We have this here 9,000 feet, 3,000 metres above sea level. On three sides there is a canyon. The canyon goes behind and back on this side. And this is a razorback. Notice how they built right on, their terraces right onto the edge of the cliff. And how they did that's absolutely amazing. But did you notice the terraces up here? Most people don't ever dare go up there. But these people constructed things up here. When the clouds move, this is very, very beautiful. The waterfalls come right down from mountains 20,000 feet high. But the civilizations of South America were very, very advanced. Today, the descendants of the Incas are a very depressed and a very suppressed people. But back in the early days, even before the Incas, there was a great civilization which did masterpieces in stone. You notice here a stone which has been put into place, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 sides to it. Now, how possibly could they have put that in? And this is not an isolated case. This was a common building method. Now, not only sideways and on top and below, but backwards behind. The stone had to fit into other stones as well. And to anyone who would suggest that this was done simply by rubbing the stones together until they fitted, let's get real about this, friends. These people were cleverer than we thought they were. Here we have the Sun Gate in Tiwanaku in Bolivia, a city which appears to have been built by giants. Absolutely amazing. Carved out of one piece of solid rock, brought from a quarry many miles away. Now here we go to China. China, if you didn't know it, has the largest man-made structure on this planet. And I'm not talking about the Great Wall of China. Here we have a pyramid. And this pyramid is larger than the Great Pyramid of Cheops. It's located 40 miles west, that's about 65 kilometres west of Siam, in the Shenxi province of northwest China. It's on the old Marco Polo Silk Route. And there are 7 of these pyramids. They actually have colours on their sides. A flat top. The 4 colours on one side and another colour on the top. After all this time, the colour is still perceptible. And the Chinese say they're not going to excavate these because man is spiritually not right. And tourists are not taken here. But these have been photographed from the air at least twice. Now here's a comparison between the largest pyramid in Shenxi, which is 1,200 feet tall, and other well-known buildings like the Cheops Pyramid in Egypt, the Empire State Building in New York. Here we have the most massive building in the world. In an ancient scripture, we have this question: who are these that fly as a cloud, and as the doves to their windows? Well, friends, if we go across to Egypt and South America, for example, over here in South America, in Venezuela, in Costa Rica and in Colombia, we have models have been found in tombs representing, may I say, resembling modern jet planes. They possess delta wings, engine housing, a cockpit, windshield, flanged tail, and elevators. Now these models have passed aerodynamic tests. 14 models are known to exist. Some of them have 2 sets of wings. Now here we have in Egypt, found at Saqqara in a tomb in 1898, an object that was thought to be a bird. And it was stuffed in a box of bird models in one of Cairo Museum's storerooms. It was rediscovered in 1969 and found to fly perfectly as a glider. There are indications, however, that it may originally have possessed a propulsion mechanism at the tail. The design is highly sophisticated. The Paleontological Museum of the USSR, as it was, has a skull of a prehistoric auroch bison, pierced by a small round hole, of an almost polished appearance without any radial cracks, indicating a projectile entered at high velocity. This has been examined by a Berlin forensic expert, and I believe there's a human skeleton, not a human skeleton, rather a skull, that has the same wound in it, same type of wound. Now friends, this one here is not of recent times, because the animal, which is now extinct by the way, was alive, and that's shown by the edges of the wound having calcified over, indicating that this animal did survive the shock. Now skeletons in Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa in the Indus Valley civilization are extremely radioactive. The ruins of these ancient Indus Valley civilizations and cities are immense. These cities, by the way, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, are thought to have contained 1 million people each. Practically nothing is known of their histories, except both were destroyed suddenly. And in Mohenjo-Daro, in an epicenter 150 feet wide, that's 50 metres wide, everything was crystallised, fused or melted. 150 feet from the centre, the bricks are melted on one side, indicating a blast. Ancient Indian texts speak of a city's people being given 7 days' notice to get out of the city. A clear warning of total destruction. And excavations down to the street level reveal 44 scattered skeletons, as if doom had come suddenly and they could not get out of their houses. All the skeletons were flattened to the ground. A father, mother and child were found flattened on the street, face down and still holding hands. And my friends, these skeletons, after thousands of years, are still among the most radioactive that have ever been found. As a matter of fact, they're on a par with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 7 years after the first successful atom bomb blast in New Mexico, Dr. Oppenheimer, who was familiar with ancient Sanskrit literature, was giving a lecture at Rochester University. During the question and answer period, a student asked Dr. Oppenheimer a question, to which Oppenheimer gave a strongly qualified answer. The student said, "Was the bomb exploded at Alamogordo during the Manhattan Project the first one to be detonated?" Dr. Oppenheimer replied, "Well, yes, in modern times, of course." Fascinating, isn't it? Well, there's some dead men's secrets for you. I believe, friends, that there'll be people who will be asking questions about this and saying, well, where can we get more information? Well, that book, Dead Men's Secrets, which we'll tell you more about after the next program, contains 1,000 forgotten secrets of the ancients. And it represents 12 years research in over 30 countries. And in each chapter there's a different subject. In one chapter we go into ancient metallurgy. In another one, ancient medicine. Another one, ancient art, or ancient electricity, or ancient flight, ancient geography. There's so many fascinating topics in which the ancients excelled. And I'd like to recommend that book. And I trust that if you get this, you're going to have a lot of fun delving into the past. Secrets which should be known about, secrets which are hidden, sometimes suppressed, but certainly subjects which are fascinating.
Firstly, you should be aware that there is an ongoing war between the Turkish security forces and the Kurdistan Workers' Party's PKK guerrillas. People are being killed on the streets by unidentified murderers, and none of them was identified or arrested. Therefore, it is really risky and dangerous to travel in Kurdistan. There is a strong possibility that security forces will arrest or detain you if they see your travel visa issued by a Kurdish organization. Therefore, you should not show your visa to any Turkish official.
This had been a scary week, and now our bus had just been stopped by Turkish police. Everyone out, we're going to search your baggage. The uniformed Turkish officer was coming along the line. He would soon reach my baggage. Stuffed inside my sleeping bag cover was my safe passage document issued by the outlawed Kurds. If the Turks found it, we were finished. I had to do something now. Quickly looking to see if anyone was watching me, I put my hand inside the cover of the sleeping bag, pulled out that document, and then I stuffed it behind my belt, behind the back of my trousers. Then I looked up and I found that someone was watching. And while they watched, the piece of paper went down my legs back onto the ground. Place names, friends, are a record of history, and according to the place names in this area of eastern Turkey, the survivors from the Ark settled down here in a place which now takes the name the Valley of Eight, and more specifically the place of Eight. We look down now from the mountains of Ararat, very close to the Ark site, into the Valley of Eight. It's a wide, beautiful valley. Here we have the village of Kazan, known as the place of Eight. The village people tell us that they don't know how that name arrived, but it's a name that has existed from time immemorial. As you can see, this is wild, dramatic country. Very beautiful. Ron Wyatt came down to this village to explore. Across the road from the village were some very old deserted relics. You'll notice that the village down here has a road going past, and across the road there were some animal pens. There is the remains of an old house here, plus 2 grave markers and another building. And behind is a hill shaped like a cup facing you, with an altar, a giant altar across. Ron's 2 sons went exploring with him. "This looks like a grave marker," one of them said. "There's another here," exclaimed Ronnie, "lying on the ground in front of it. These must be grave markers." Ron had his camera running and the inscriptions were unmistakable. But this they never expected, yet here it was in front of them. They didn't expect to be so favoured. It was happening, one discovery after another. A sequence of discoveries so breathtakingly rapid, Ron's mind was whirling. He had to mentally pinch himself. Could all this be true? Yes, the iconographs identified the graves. If the inscription meant anything, then what they had stumbled upon was, probably, dare they say it, the first post-flood grave markers on this planet. The 2 grave markers have the 8 cross symbols of Noah and his family above an ancient petrographed portrayal of one man's death on one marker and that of his wife on the other. And these grave markers were in the very front of an ancient stone house in the place of Eight. Below the rainbow, associated with the flood account, on the left was the crest of a wave, and atop the wave a boat. To the right of this were 8 stick characters. It was clear who they were: 2 older figures, male and female, accompanied by 3 smaller men and 3 women. Now, according to Genesis, the 8 human survivors of the great flood were Noah and his wife, their 3 sons, Shem, Ham and Japheth, and their sons' wives. Now, you'll notice something about the inscription. The woman had her head bowed. She was half crouching, her eyes were closed, and the other 7 are walking away from her. This lady had died. She must have been the first of them to go. Now, although we can't be certain, I think there could be evidence that Mrs. Noah's skin was more brown than this. The other grave marker bore the inscription of the man in death and the other 6 persons walking away from him. Here in the village of Kazan, there was a wall beside the village and faced with tiles. Along the wall there were pictures. I can't show these to you today because they have since been dismantled. But the first tile depicted animals entering the boat, depicted 8 people, other faces around, the ark riding on a wave, and then a God with water flowing from him at his feet. 8 people under a rainbow. Now, all of this was eventually broken up to be sold to tourists by the local village people after Ron had discovered it and found its significance. 1 tile ended up in a local villager's house. Let me ask, could you keep such a discovery secret? Ron was exploding. He wanted to shout it to the world. "That's incredible," gasped his colleague. "Simply incredible." The man was an Ark Search colleague. "Ron, I must see this." And trembling with excitement, Ron drove the man out to the village of Kazan. You might call Ron naive. He trusted that his friend would feel the same awe that had moved him, a reverence, if you like. Mehmet, the village mayor, looked both ways down the street, then yanked the visitor inside. The pact was sealed with a drink, and the visitor crept into the darkness and sped off with no lights. Within hours, the 2 graves were dug up. Several weeks later, the Turkish authorities contacted Ron. "Mr. Wyatt, do you know who could have done this thing?" These graves had contents which had been sold on the black market. In fact, one item was a bodice. The lady who was buried had this beautiful bodice round her waist with large stones, and it fetched $75 million on the Istanbul black market. Since then, the Turkish authorities have actually retrieved the sarcophagus, the coffin, from inside. It's now lying in a back room of the Ankara Museum, and it's of polished granite, 18 feet long. Now, I don't believe that this woman was that long, but we do believe these people were big, and possibly she was 12 feet or more. We've found much evidence in this area and around the world of 12-foot giants. As a matter of fact, before the flood, the Bible says people were giants, and they lived much longer in the special conditions that were changed after the flood. Recently, I was out in Rotuma, an island in the Pacific, and out there are huge graves, and it's believed that 12-foot giants once lived on that island. The skeletons are in the graves. Soon after this, Ron and his 2 sons were sleeping in the same room, a room on the same floor that Trevor and I later occupied. And about midnight, they were awakened with a great commotion. They looked out of the window, and here was a crowd of Kurdish people trying to get into the hotel. These people were after their blood. And very soon they had heard footsteps coming up the stairs. So Ron and his 2 sons quickly barricaded the door. They then placed a bed against the chest of drawers, and they heard a key in the lock. Then, as they tied sheets and blankets to go out of the window, they let themselves down 2 floors into another room and escaped for their lives down the street. This is not a place you'd go for a holiday. Sometime later, Ron and Alan Roberts and a few others were kidnapped as they were driving through the area. And they were the prisoners of the Kurds for 21 days. It was a very scary occasion. In fact, they felt eventually that their lives were going to be taken. and they had to make a determined effort to escape. That piece of news hit the world press. Here is the man that dug up the grave, Mehmet, the village mayor. This man was in league with another person on the Ark team, and the Turkish officials are now looking for that other man. But Mehmet was heard by Ron to say, let us take this man up into the hills and get rid of him. Ron, over his 34 times at the Ark site, had picked up quite a deal of Turkish, and he understood that he was the focus of this man's interest. So he and his taxi driver quickly cleared off, and Ron doesn't like going back there, I can assure you. When I let a few of my friends know that I was planning to get down to the village of 8, I wanted to check out these things for myself. Alan Roberts warned me on the phone, Jonathan, it's too dangerous. People disappear. It was now late 1993. Out there were some of the first anchor stones ever dropped from the Ark near this village. There the Noah family had built a house, we believed. They'd tilled the ground, and there finally Noah and his wife had been buried. This was the ancestral home of us all. Keep away from Kazan, urged Ron, they'll kill you. However, I decided to take all possible precautions. I'd grown to trust the one who, above all, takes care of us. I laid the matter before him. He knew my deep longing to record these things and to use them to vindicate his cause. It was now over to him. But I did take precautions, and speaking to the Kurdish people here in Australia, I eventually obtained from them a visa which would not be recognised by the Turks, and it's something that I had to keep out of sight if I went to Turkey. But this visa would give me protection, hopefully, if Kurds had any mind to kidnap me, and I pulled this out. I hoped, maybe foolishly, maybe naively, that this might protect me. So I took it with me. Meanwhile, Ron warned me. He said, don't stay overnight in Debayazid. This is the hotel where we were attacked by that group of people and had to escape. He said, when you fly into Turkey, into Istanbul, you fly across to a town here called Erzurum. At Erzurum, there'll be a taxi driver who you can trust. He's a tall man, and when you find him in the crowd, make a pact with him, and he will wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he'll drive you each day to the Ark site, back and forth, about a 5-hour journey. Don't by any means stay here overnight. And above all, don't go out to the village of Kazan. Even that taxi driver won't take you. He was with me when they wanted to kill me, and they would have killed him too. So as I made the trip into Turkey, I came off the plane here at Erzurum. I found the taxi driver, the tall grey-haired man. He said, I'll be with you shortly. And meanwhile, I waited. Very soon the crowd disappeared, and he was nowhere in sight. And in this town of 300,000 people, I felt sure I had lost him forever. So I said to my colleague Trevor, we're going to have to get here without this man. We can't trust anybody else to wake us up at 3 o'clock in the morning and take us to the Ark site each day. So the only safe thing is to go by bus and stay at Debayazid at the hotel where we're close to the Ark site, and we'll find some local way of getting there. So I went to the tourist bureau in Erzurum and I said, can you give me a road map of this area? They looked at me sideways, and shortly after that 2 big detectives came round to the hotel to look at our passports. We were asking for a road map in what was a war area. So there was not much hope of us getting that map. We took the bus, and the only way to go was by bus now. We felt we would find ourselves a man to take us up to the Ark site, a Kurdish man who knew the tracks well. So we took the little old bus across to the town of Debayazid, a 5-hour journey. And near Debayazid, the hills rise up here, and behind those hills, just about 5 kilometres up from here, is where the Ark site is. The town is down this way. The next morning, we came out of the hotel. I walked around the street, and by the way, that night I'd been praying hard. Trevor and I prayed that night and that morning. We said, Lord, we don't know how we're going to get up through this Kurdish country safely to the Ark site without somebody we can trust. will you please get us somebody that can speak English, that we can understand, whom we can trust, and someone we can feel safe to work with. So the next morning we walked around here, and I was talking to some Kurdish man who hardly understood English, and I was saying, do you know somebody here with a car who can speak English? And way down the other end of the block there was a man, I'm sure he didn't hear what we were saying, but this man called out, he said, can I help you, can I help you? He was a 26-year-old Kurdish man called Sayyam, very, very fine chap. We became good friends, and he took us through the mountain villages. Lovely people up here, very simple living people. And from there we ultimately came to the Ark site and we commenced our work. And this is where Hassam, of course, sleeps, as we mentioned to you in a previous program. We came down here and started doing some work on the Ark, scraping away some of the mud on the sides. And ultimately, Siam and I became like brothers, very good friends. And then I showed him a picture of one of the anchor stones. Here we are scraping off the mud. This is Siam, this is Trevor. And in between the uprights we found that the mud was eroding away, and here were some of the upright ribs of the ship. Siam, I said, this is an anchor stone. And he said, tell me about that. So I explained what these old anchor stones were for. He says, tell me, where's this one? I said, this one's in the village of Kazan. Now that was the forbidden village that we had no way of ever reaching. And suddenly his face lit up. He said, Kazan, Kazan. He said, that's my mother's village. I'll take you there. Now I'd made a very strong point not of asking ever to be taken to this place. I knew how dangerous it would be. But I'd left it in the Lord's hands. If he wanted us to go out there, he would provide the way. Now here was the very man, the only man who possibly could ever get us in there safely. And I believe now that that unfortunate event of missing the Turkish taxi driver at Erzurum was something that was working in our favour, because now we got Siam, a local Kurdish man who came from the same village and could get us in. What a wonderful providence that was. Now the next morning we went out from, here's the Ark site, we went out from Debayazit and we started driving up this road. Mount Ararat's up here, and by the way, Turkish air pilots were bombing the mountain. We could see the smoke from the bombs. And we came up here, we turned off this road, we turned just around here, and we ran into a Turkish army convoy. You can see where we were headed. And we were arrested. Our passports were confiscated, and we were in custody for several hours. And Trevor nudged me, he said, hey, we're in real trouble. We could go to jail for life. This is dangerous stuff. Here's the military, we're in their hands. And here we are foreigners, we can't speak their language. They brought in one man after another to interrogate us. And eventually there was a report that they were going to go up to our hotel and look through our baggage. Now I should say, friends, that in that baggage I had that Kurdish travel safety visa, and if that fell into the Turkish hands, we were finished. So I inwardly prayed, Lord, don't let them go up to that hotel. Don't let them do that. Well, a short while after, the interviewer said, no, we're not going to go up to the hotel now. They brought in one final man to interview us, and I felt perhaps this was the time we had to take the initiative. So I thought, well, I'll interrogate him instead. So I said to him, where do you come from? He said, well, I come from the far end of Turkey. Oh, you must be missing your home, I said. Yes, he said, I hate being here. I wish we weren't doing this. How long have you been in the army? Oh, only 15 months. I have to go for 2 years. And so we began talking in this vein. And eventually he realised that we were no bad men, we were not doing any harm in the area. So he said, look, when the governor wakes up, I'll ask him if you can be released. And so after a few hours he did. And we had to sign a document, however. It was in Turkish, and we had to trust that we were not signing away our lives. The document, we were told, said that if we were caught in the crossfire between the Turks and the Kurds, that we would not hold the Turks responsible. Well, straight after this we were released and we went back to the hotel. Now, by the way, you'll see this is a little out of focus. We'd given up taking pictures in this town in the street, So we took pictures now from moving cars. We consider this a dangerous place. And after a few hours inside the hotel, we waited, and then Siam came back and said, I've just been out to the village of Kazan to make sure that everything's safe. Let's go. So off we went. Here is the village. And we came in here, and on the way through, Siam stopped to pick up a man who introduced himself as the village chief. I looked at him and shuddered, and Trevor nudged me. This man looks sinister, doesn't he? The man gave another name, but he was Mehmet, the man against whom Ron had warned me. This was his deputy, and here's Siam, my dear Kurdish friend. The chief and his deputy took us up into the village, and they examined some of the anchor stones with us. Here's Siam in front of it. The village children began to take an interest after a little while, and we went up to an old cemetery where several anchor stones were still there, and they had been put up as tombstones, although originally they were the anchor stones similar to the others. Then after a little while of this, we went across to a hill about 2 kilometres to the west. Here we began walking, looking for more evidence and relics. There's the village back there, and here we come up the other hill. Now you'll notice holes in the ground here, and when I inquired why these holes were here, I found out that the village people had been digging up graves all around the valley, because since they had dug up Mrs. Noah's grave and found something, they were expecting they'd find treasure all over the place. And these people were notorious robbers. This village was not a good village. You won't see this very clearly on here, but there's a representation of the ark on this big stone. And here is an altar. The head was placed in here for the killing of animals. Now for an hour, Mehmet and another guided us over this valley of 8 to anchor stones, altars and inscriptions. But friends, my eyes were kept scanning for the spot I had really come to see. I wanted to see the grave sites, the sites of the old house, and so on. But at the hilltop here, we examined another one of the big anchor stones that was lying on the top, and I believe this had been dropped when the boat came over in a gentle arc up to the hills beyond. And these were lying in a fairly curving line up to the site. You'll notice that the hole has been broken off here. The hole is there, but the top of the stone has been broken off. Now we began to go back down the valley toward the village of Kazan. My eyes were being peeled, but I didn't want the Mehmet to know that I was looking for something else. We returned from that western hill, and back near the village itself, our hosts were knocking out stones from a wall to show us an old inscription. And Mehmet, by the way, brought out a book by David Fassold, a former member of the team. And he was very proud about this book because it had his own photograph in. And this book by David Fassold spoke a lot about the anchor stones. David, by the way, was a marine expert who had been working on the site. Now this is Dave, by the way, and he's the author of that book. I knew that at this moment I had to make my move or never. I wanted to see the site of the grave that had this inscription on it. And the risk had to be taken. Dangerous it would be if the chief discovered what I really knew of Ron, himself and the grave robbery. So better to feign ignorance, throw in someone else's name. So I sketched this out on a piece of paper, and swallowing hard, I said to him, have you seen this? Do you know where this might be? Is it anywhere around here? David Fassold saw this, I said. Mehmet instantly recognised it. Agitation showed in his face. No, not David Fassold, he said. Then he paused, weighing his words. On my land over here. I did not know it at the time, but this man carried a gun under his pocket. We skirted the area where I knew the gravestones and the house were. They were over this way. But we skirted right around here from the village to avoid that area, even though he said he was taking us there, and we eventually started climbing up the hill here. There is the big altar stone that you saw in my sketch earlier. And here is the amphitheatre hill, through which you can stand here and sound can be heard so far away. And perhaps the old patriarch stood here by the altar, and his descendants came and assembled from time to time when an animal sacrifice was made. Anyway, up on the hill, we came up to this altar, and we just kept on going. It's a 12-foot altar, by the way, with a step halfway up it. You can't climb it today, you can't step that high. You would have to be a 12-foot man to step on and then get to the top of it. But this was an altar no doubt used by people who were much bigger than us. So here we are, here's the altar. And we skirted that area and kept going. Up on the hill beyond the big altar, Ron had seen human bones up here and a skull with hair still on it, which dogs had been devouring. This man who was taking us up here now, Ron believed to be a killer. It was up the same hill that Mehmet was now luring me. How far is it, I asked. Oh, just 100 metres, he said. We kept on walking that distance. Then I said to Siam, look, we've come this far. How far is it now? He said, well, I'll ask him. Come, come, said the man. He wouldn't answer how far it was. And I kept on saying, now, how far is it beyond this spot? He said, come, come. And eventually, Siam pinned him down and Mehmet said, oh, 1 more kilometre. Come. I recalled that plot to get Ron up into the hills there and get rid of him. So I quickly said to Siam, I'm going back. Now I was behind the party being led up. So when I turned around, I was now in front. You can see the size of a person by that altar. And there's Trevor, by the way. He wasn't going to come up with us. And so I started turning back down the hill. And here we are looking back toward the village. And the area that I wanted to examine was over here. And there, by the way, is the ruins of the house. And the 2 gravestones were not too far away. And so I started walking straight across there. Now we were in the broad open, so Mehmet couldn't do very much. And I kept walking, snapping pictures as I went. Now here we have the house, what's left of it. And in front of here were the 2 gravestones. Now this house, I'll show you a sketch of the wall of the house. It's very, very interesting. The house was made of stone, and the window from the interior widened out as it went through that 3 feet of wall. So people inside could see at a wide angle outside, but people on the outside could not see so well inside. It was very, very well built. Now this house, by the way, was now in about 4 feet of silt that had built up over the centuries, and the local people have been rummaging through this now and destroying part of the wall since we documented it to look for treasure and so on. They didn't realise the significance of all this until we started exploring around here, and now of course they've gone wild, these local vandals. However, as soon as I'd taken the pictures, I cleared out as fast as I could go, and we just went. Siam, Trevor and I went for our lives back to Bayezid, getting out of this Valley of Eight as fast as we could go. Mehmet had sometime in the past given to Bob Morrell, a member of our ARC team, this item from the House of Noah. It's part of a granite bowl, and the earliest dishes were of granite. About the same time as Mrs. Noah's grave was dug out, there appeared these bones. They were shown in the reception of the Erzurum Hotel. That's the hotel some of us have been staying at in Bayezid. And the receptionists showed a giant human jawbone so big you could just about put your head into it. It showed up about the same time as Mrs. Noah's grave was dug up, as I mentioned. Now, we know that the people back there were very, very big. Those that lived before the flood, were born in the antediluvian world, and who survived into the new world for a few hundred years. long life, larger size was a predominant feature of mankind, and many large remains have been found, and we suspect that perhaps these are the jawbone of Mrs. Noah. We can't be sure, but it appeared about the same time. There's so much evidence from around the world now. And by the way, in my newsletter, which I'll mention in a moment, I bring out regular news of discoveries of giants around the world, ancient giants. Oh, now friends, about that baggage search. You might have been wondering, this is by the way one of the bags that I had with me when we were being searched. This has seen a lot of action, this old bag. Even the stitching is starting to come away now. But here we have the piece of paper that I stuffed down behind my trousers and fell to the floor. And in case you're wondering what that man did when he saw me, saw it fall to the ground, I think he must have been a Kurd, because he didn't tell the Turkish police that that had happened. Well, that's enough for tonight, friends, but I'd like to remind you that there are a couple of books that you'll find more information on these subjects inside. First of all, there's the Dead Men's Secrets books, which refers to the surprising discoveries of the ancient world. Sea floor, jungle and desert sands give up 1,000 forgotten secrets. Technology that vanished. This is the book Dead Men's Secrets, and I can recommend it. I wrote it after all. It's a very, very interesting subject for many people. And if you want to know more about the Ark subject, the scientific evidence, the arguments of the skeptics against it, the play, the counterplay of characters, the murder attempts, the phone tappings, the betrayals, and also the wonderful miracles that counterbalance that. The Ark conspiracy tells that story. In fact, we've just sold out of the first edition. There's a second edition coming off the press now. And finally, I do put out a quarterly newsletter, and the subscription price of this does help our expedition work. Also, we update various interesting discoveries that we're involved in and that others are involved in around the world. Anyway, friends, thanks for being with us. It's been good speaking with you, and I hope you found this enjoyable.
You've been watching a presentation by Jonathan Gray in the Surprising Discovery series. To receive regular newsletters, to inquire about available publications, or to book Jonathan as a speaker at your church fellowship or community group, write to Jonathan Gray, Post Office Box 3370, Rundle Mall, Adelaide, South Australia 5000.